Hello, my name is Manfred J Von Vulte. I am the author of The Purple Lion and the Spotted Leopard. There's a Muffin in My Boot, a guide to character for primary and middle school students, and you are listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Manfred J Von Vulte about his new children's book, The Purple Lion and the Spotted Leopard, There's a Muffin in My Boot. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. If you want to help the site and the podcast, please consider supporting the effort by chipping in at ko-fi.com/True North Country Comics. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. Born in Montreal but now residing in Ontario, Manfred is the published author of numerous articles, as well as 2 children's works, a history book, and an educational guide on the use of comic books and experiential learning for parents and teachers. Manfred has been teaching for over 20 years and has been with the Durham Catholic District School Board since 2017. In 2019, he was recognized with the Distinguished Catholic Educator Award by his peers at St. Leo Catholic School, where he runs a comic book club and animation studio. The Ontario Teachers Plan awarded him and his students $5,000 to develop this animation initiative in 2021. Manfred was profiled in Alumni Spotlight by York University's Faculty of Education in the same year. He is the director of the Comic Book Project Canada and was featured on the Space Channel, the Global Television Network, and at Fan Expo Toronto. His passion is to help reluctant writers and readers through the medium of comic books. Manfred is joined by illustrator Shane Kirschenblatt, who have joined forces for the new children's picture book, The Purple Lion and the Spotted Leopard, There's a Muffin in My Boot, to bring life to the importance of character for primary and middle school students. Join Gary the Purple Lion and Larry the Spotted Leopard as they go to school and discover that perseverance, integrity, honesty, resilience, humility, and many more noble qualities are so important to their primary school experience. Besides that, help 2 friends figure out just exactly what it is in Larry's boot. Middle school students, parents, and educators will enjoy the second half of the book, which includes more than a dozen character traits, critical questions, and genuine suggestions on how to improve as a student with a moral compass. Each section contains phrases that will help guide the specific age group. And now, without further ado, here's my chat with Manfred J Von Vulte about his new children's book, The Purple Lion and the Spotted Leopard, There's a Muffin in My Boot. So Manfred J Von Vulte, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
It's my absolute pleasure to chat with you yet again about comic books and writing, and always a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate your time, absolutely. But before we get going with all the questions, I want to ask you, what's on your bedside reading table? What are you reading today?
Actually, I got this a few years ago because I like to sort of read in cycles. It's Taschen's 75 Years of DC Comics. It's a really large anthology, but my wife bought it for me years ago for a Christmas present. And I tend to be one of those people that I don't know why I read things at certain times, but I think Christmas was coming around again, and you revisit the gems in your collection, and this one is certainly one of those. And I remember I had Neil Adams' signature in it.
Wow.
Which, he passed, and it was just a big loss. And I remember I wanted to see where that signature was again, and just to reread that wonderful collection of works that's part of that anthology.
Yeah, lots of good stuff there. That's a great book to have, for sure. Yeah. But we're here talking about your book, your latest book, right, entitled The Purple Lion and the Spotted Leopard, There's a Muffin in My Boot. And that's a new children's book that you have out. I want to ask you, maybe you could talk a wee bit about it and what inspired you to create it.
Well, a bunch of things. I remember I was working in the West End of Toronto at the time, and my wife and son would come pick me up at the Kennedy subway station. And my son Robert was, I think he was about 3 years old. And he kept, he had a worried look on his face. And I said, well, what's the matter, buddy? He goes, I think there's a muffin in my boot. And it turned out to be just a sock. And I thought, boy, that'd be a cute title for a book someday. And I kind of put it in the back of my mind. And I thought, okay, we'll revisit that. And as the years sort of went by, I was heavily involved in character education at a school called Northmount School, a wonderful all-boys Catholic school in Toronto. And then at the German International School in Toronto, we developed the character concept there. And I've always been interested in character education. So I thought, okay, time to maybe put these characters down on paper and develop some sort of a story. When my son Robert was 3 and 4, I used to tell this improv story about a purple lion and a spotted leopard and their adventures. And I thought, great, I already have 2 characters developed there. And, we'll talk about proper behavior in school and how to be a good friend, how to be compassionate, charitable to others, generous of spirit, and that. So I thought about the book being sort of a primary picture book, so from kindergarten to about grade 3. And then the second half of the book is for middle school. It has 20 virtues that I think are important, that schools think are important, things like perseverance, friendship, caring, humility. And I thought, what else should I do with this? Like, where would I get phrases about these virtues? And I sort of went to, it's just sort of the ethnic history of different places in Toronto that I've been, and neighborhoods I've been in, friendships and relationships that I've had with people I've lived in Toronto since I was 10. And I thought I'll go back and, get some of those words of wisdom, as many children of refugees and immigrants often have, and count myself among that group. And I thought, those words of wisdom are really essential to understanding life and to, being a good person. So in addition to that, I thought it would be neat to translate a key phrase from each of those 20 virtues into 20 of the more, I don't want to say popular languages of the earth, but the 20 languages I could get a hold of. But I do have languages from every continent. And I'm also very pleased to say I have 2 indigenous languages right here in Canada, which was fantastic. So, to get all those words of wisdom for different virtues for the middle school student with doable examples. How do I become a perseverant student? How do I become a good listener? And then take it from this wisdom of immigrants and people who have been in Canada for time immemorial, and putting it to paper.
Very good. That's very worthwhile. That's for sure. I guess these are books that you don't see currently on shelves in school libraries. This would be something new, I guess you could say, to a degree.
Absolutely. One of the things that we say in elementary school literature, and I've been working in elementary schools for 23 years as a teacher, we always say that literacy should do 2 things. 1, it should take students by the hand and take them somewhere. And 2, literacy should be a mirror for students to engage in. They should see themselves in the book. And I think that's great. And a lot of work is being done with characters and ethnic and cultural representations. However, what I don't see a lot of, and I know they are out there, is the text in the actual language of these people. So I have everything like Tagalog, simplified Chinese, Urdu, Ukrainian, Farsi, Portuguese, Spanish, Tamil, Arabic, French, Chinese, German, Greek, Hindi. So some of these languages, yes, you can find a lot of material, but others you can't. And to offer it in mainstream, I think is so valuable, because students, maybe they don't speak the language anymore of their grandparents or even their parents, but it may be a way to reconnect with this international cultural past. And I think that's, again, extremely, extremely important to make those connections for literacy.
Absolutely. Very worthwhile. I want to ask you about your collaborator. You're the writer of this book, but you had an illustrator helping you. Can you talk a bit about who helped you with this book from an artistic standpoint, and perhaps how did you find him?
Oh, yes. Well, the illustrator for this one is my dear friend Shane Kirschenblatt. And Shane is a well-known Toronto illustrator. He's done many things in the comic book and the arts community. He's an illustrator for the award-winning Mark Twain's Niagara. He's Joe Shuster nominated Toronto Comics Anthology Volume 3 artist. He's an established instructor and a five-time recipient of the Ontario Arts Council grant. So he's also got his own animation school, which he began running through the pandemic, and I think he will be running it again in the spring and the summer. And he's an extremely talented individual. I first met Shane when I was working at the All Boys School at Northmount, and he and a couple of his partners came in and they did an animation program with students. He's a super duper educator. If I was to learn how to draw, which I cannot draw very well, I would definitely learn it from Shane. He's got incredible patience, a wonderful imagination. I really work well with him, and I want to work with him again in the future because he really understands the concept of a writer and is able to convert it into live illustrations. And it didn't take much for him to conceptualize what I meant by the purple line and the spotted leopard and what I was going for in the primary part of this book. He's really able to, think about character motivations, character construction, and then actually see my characters come to life. This was a tremendous joy for me and a sense of wonder too. As much as I love writing, he loves to work in visual arts and conceive of characters and to teach this as well. He's I can't say enough about Shane. He's tremendously talented.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit more about the creation process? You mentioned that you would just give him an idea, but was there more to it? Did you discuss the story first and then said, okay, here you go? How'd it go?
I had written the story. It comes out of also some tragic circumstances. In 2019, 2020, I had lost my lower left leg, and I was in hospital for 2 months, and I'm a very bored individual. And everyone was saying, oh, you're not going to get back to work, and it's going to be a long time. And I remember my wife saying to the team at Providence Villa and the Scarborough Hospital, you don't know my husband. So I started writing this story, and I started learning animation myself. So I had written out the story, and I had been talking to Shane over the internet saying, this is what I want to do. And we started to flush out the characters. What are their motivations? What expressions would they have? What kind of persons are they? Very, very complex. I remember I had, in 2013, I was one of a bunch of folks who had breakfast with Stan Lee at Fan Expo. And I remember Stan was talking about his process where he develops the characters first and then the story comes out of that. And this is something we did as well. So we talked about these two characters. What were they like? What characteristics did they have? Their sense of generosity and caring. And then we put it into a story. And a lot of it evolved also from, children had been very much separated from each other for these last 2 years because of the pandemic. And, not everyone came back from online learning immediately. So you had a lot of, new learnings or repeated learnings about how children would relate to each other. Not that they don't know how, because children are inherently good, but they're just sort of a guide to say, hey, you know what? Here's what it looks like when you're a good winner or a good loser. And here's what it looks like when there's a new student and you should eat with them. And here's what it means to care for your friend. And I think a lot of these themes really came out in this book as well. I mean, it was a 2.5 year process. And certainly, I think a lot of writers will tell you that even out of tragedies like the one I think that happened to me, and certainly the global tragedy of COVID-19, really reflects in the work as a means to, getting back to a new normal, but a normal where, of course, friendships matter. Of course, generosity matter. Of course, charitable behavior is important. But other things, too, like perseverance and honesty and integrity. These are still themes that students should hear and should be modeled for students. And if I could do that through this book, then that's the greatest thing.
For sure. I know that you and I have talked in the past in our interviews about the value of comic books. Now, this is not a comic book, but it's a picture book, and certainly it's also a stepping stone, similar to comic books and graphic novels, for reading. I wonder if you could talk a wee bit to that idea about how these books are enabling young readers to get into this sort of new realm of education and learning.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just going to go back a little bit and maybe to a previous conversation, but I can recall when I first started getting into comics, it was always a trip to the variety store and then a subsequent trip to the dentist, which my mom didn't appreciate. But what came of it was that there was a store that was starting to sell these comic books, and I started reading some of them. And I found that the vocabulary was what pulled me in. I really wanted to know what the characters were talking about. And in Batman and Iron Man, you have a lot of engineering terms or other terms, or some books explored history and whatnot. And in the spirit of that, this book as well intermingled into the primary narrative, that part of the book. There are words of virtue that students will read and say, well, I need to know more about that. What does it really mean to have integrity? What does it really mean to be a good listener? Why is gossip not a good thing? And then to provoke you even further. It's a real hook, but it's authentic because kids want to explore that a little bit more. As much as we as adults are into sort of self-help, there's always a huge section about this in bookstores. I think to a certain degree, children are as well. In the primary level and in the middle school level, they want to become better people. They want this advice on, how do I become a better friend? And maybe that gets me more friends. How do I be a good listener? Another one of the topics to talk about in the book is collaboration. How does that work again when I work with my friends? When do I lead? When do I listen? How can I become more effective in that? And I think what really works in here, what is, I think, another great tenet of the book, is that on every Ontario report card, whether you're in the Catholic system or the public system, there are learning skills. And, we do, I think, a fantastic job to educate parents and students about what these learning skills are. But I think this book goes one step further and but we identify these learning skills in the book as virtues. And we give students the idea of, hey, you want to get better at collaboration? Here's what you do. You want to get better at being independent? Again, here are some tips. And it is a way, to sort of re-engage that report card or re-engage that assessment, but on their own terms, by reading a story, by looking at these virtues, by hearing it in another language that's not English. And sometimes this rings a little bit more true if it's in the language of your family. And that's part of the point as well.
Absolutely. It's a great book that's out now, and I know it's probably maybe a little unfair to ask you, but now you just published this book, what's next for you? What's your next big project that you're working on?
It's very unlike like this, and it most definitely won't be a picture book, but it's one I've sort of been working on all for a very long time, and I'm passionate about it. And the working title, and I'm pretty sure this will be the title, but it's going to take me a few more years. This might be one of the last ones, but who knows? It's called The Last Greatest Club, Successful Children of Divorce. And very different from this kind of a book, but I've always been interested in that. I am a successful child of divorce, and I think there's a lot of us out there. And I think, unfortunately, there's a good block of scholarship that tells kids like me when I was a kid that there would be impediments to success. Sure, that's out there, but I believe that the successful children of divorce are more the rule than the exception.
So that will take some time for sure, and you've got some work that you have out now. So where do you recommend that people go online to find out more about your current book and your future work in general?
Yes. Okay. Well, you can go to a website called comicbookprojectcanada.com. Also, you can have a look. You go to YouTube and type in my last name, VON space VULTE. You can go to my animation channel, and there you can also find the teaser trailer for this book, which my publisher has put out.
Very good. Manfred, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
It's nothing that you didn't ask, but I think I need to sort of restate it again. Just to sort of wrap up the book, it would have been very easy for me to write these virtues only in English. And, English is a superb language. However, it is a little bit limited, and meaning that sometimes these phrases tend to resonate better in a language that is closer to your heart. And I'll give you an example. My father used to say in German, von nix kommt nix, which means from nothing comes nothing. And of course, that's not a bad direct translation, but I find if words are in the language of mom and dad or grandpa or nona or oma or whomever, this resonates much, much clearer. And also, because they do relate to the learning skills in report cards, not every family has a solid command of the English language. So perhaps to hear these virtues or these learning skills in languages like Hindi, like Chinese, like Urdu, like Ukrainian, and many of the 20 others might be that missing piece that families can connect with to examine how those virtues are expressed in our current report cards and how they can address that with their own children. Often the language of the family is the language of the heart, and that's the connection that I see very important.
Thanks to Manfred for the chat. You can discover more about the Purple Line and the Spotted Leopard, There's a Muffin in My Boot, at friesenpress.com. That's FRIESEN press.com, and is available from Chapters Indigo, Amazon, Walmart, and Barnes & Noble. You can discover more about Manfred at comicbookprojectcanada.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Tumblr at True North Country Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. Please send all feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. And if you want to help the site and the podcast, please consider supporting the effort by chipping in at ko-fi.com/TrueNorthCountryComics. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2023.